Morning. How is everybody? Good? Awesome. So-so, huh, no? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm really, really, really humbled and honored to be here at WordCamp Asia, the first one. It's amazing to see the WordPress community come out for everything that's going on here, and I'm just really grateful that you guys chose me to come up here and share some of our stories with you. So let's talk about bringing together open source and the MarTech stack and where the future is going with that. So why am I up here? I have the privilege of working at CrowdFavorite. I am the CEO and chief strategist. CrowdFavorite, for those of you who don't know, was started by Alex King. Alex King was one of the original contributors to the first release of WordPress. His team in Denver did some amazing things in the very early years when everybody thought that WordPress was just a blog. I love open source. I love everything that is open source, and I believe it is the future of the enterprise. I started my career in closed source enterprise systems. I started my career in the dawn of the CMS and trying to understand what the enterprise needed. So even though I've been doing this here for almost 30 years and I've been in the WordPress community since 2012, I'm still learning, and every year there's something new and exciting. So let's talk about why some of these big major brands choose WordPress. We've had 16 years experience at CrowdFavorite scaling these brands and using open source software, mostly WordPress, to actually bring these brands to life and help them get their information, their marketing, and publishing out there. A note about buzzwords and lexicon. There's a lot of talk about CMS, Agile CMS, DXP, multi-channel, omni-channel. Everybody uses something different, but the bottom line is, if you look back in history, we had everybody thinking about the web, everybody thinking about what we're going to publish on the web. We're going to move the brochures. We're going to move publishing to the web. Then we started talking about interacting with the web. It doesn't matter what you call it. The idea is, where are we going with transmitting information and communicating with each other? So as these terms come in and out of fashion, just don't worry about it. Now, one of the things I love about coming to these WordCamps is sitting down and just going, poof. Yesterday, I had the luxury of sitting in Alberto's talk, and he said something when he was addressing the consumer market and what social closed platforms are doing that just, I went, that's exactly the point also for the enterprise, for the big brands. Everybody, when they approach the enterprise, they're like, tell me what features you need. Tell me how to add personalization. Tell me how to add progressive profiling. And it's not about that. It's about creating these use cases, creating these stories. So again, hats off. Thank you, Alberto. You helped me actually expand my way of thinking on this. But I do want to talk to you from the enterprise perspective, from the client's perspective, because we come to these WordCamps and we think of things in the words have said. So the most asked questions that we get asked when we do strategy engagements with our clients is, how do we get past the idea of pushing assets out there and talking about getting out there with omni-channel and bi-directional and all these other buzzwords about really communicating with our clients? How do we get there, get out there and really use the web, open web, applications, social media, all these things? How do we do that? Well, they think about it in the term, for those of you who already work in the enterprise, I'm boring you, as the 360 experience for the customer, right? So what ends up happening is they're all talking about personalization. They're all talking about reaching out to those different data channels you see out there. And it's a very pretty picture you see. You see the customer at the center. You see, oh, look, there's like 2 or 3 things that you have to hook up. It's all going to be very simple, right? Well, in the WordPress space, we've had the rise of the API. And that's allowed us to bring data in from different sources. And as we brought data in about communicating better, this is really exciting. And in 2015, that's when we went from taking literally an isolated moment of a WordPress installation in the box. It was a very low level of effort for marketing teams. Marketing teams said, I'm going to just log in, and I'm just going to try and get this published. And everybody fell in love with WordPress on the marketing side. The Walt Disney Company in 2011 made a 10-year commitment to WordPress and open source. They moved off a closed source system called Go Publish. It was written in Visual Basic, for those of you who remember what that is, to WordPress. They've renewed that commitment. They're going at least another 10 years with WordPress. Why? Because they could sit down and they could teach somebody how to use WordPress in 5 minutes. Posts, pages, the concepts of adjusting your theme. So all of a sudden with the API, the REST API, we started seeing, wow, we can do more with WordPress. Let's do that. Let's plug all these things in. It's amazing. All right? So what ended up happening? We started making the websites more complex. We started adding all these little features, right? So we're looking at it like this, right? We're looking at it like the opportunities are endless, but what ends up happening is we have a limitation in what we can do when it comes to creating that admin experience. Marketing teams started having to do more and more work to get the information out there. So while we in the WordPress space and the open source space are looking at it like this, what's happened? I'm going to skip to the end to just show you a preview. Clients are looking at it like this. This is one of the largest telecom communication companies in the US, right? They don't think about it as, I'm just going to hook up a couple of things. They actually are thinking about it as a complete 360 experience. And the smallest icons on the screen are actually the technology that they're using. They're actually thinking about how do we connect these things. So getting back to our story, we were very excited. The promise of multi-channel. We're going to actually be able to do this. Then we started adding all these channels. We started adding the way that we're going to administer the website and the amount of content we're going to bring in and out of there. What ended up happening is those channels grew. Those channels grew exponentially. Marketing teams started going, this is insane. It's a lot of work. So as we moved over here to duplex data, going back and forth, the level of work, the level of configuration, the level of bringing things together got more and more difficult. So the rush to create this multi-channel, this omni-channel, ended up with marketing teams just pulling their hair out saying, we have too many interfaces, our workflows are unperceivable. So, what do? What other choices are available as a marketing team? Well, when we look at WordPress, what ended up happening, the feedback that started coming back was, if you already work in enterprise WordPress, this is like a bingo game. These are all the reasons why your clients say, we don't want to base things on WordPress. This is way too complicated, right? All of us who already have been there know how to answer each one of these questions, but this is the perception when the marketing team brings in their own IT stack, their own IT team, and says, hey, we're thinking about using WordPress for something more complex. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, as we say, this is how they were selling Adobe Experience Manager and Sitecore. Now, those of us who are experienced in WordPress in any form know that that last column is not true. We can absolutely do those things in WordPress. But this is the sales proposition out there. And what that's created is the perceived choices around you can either have what they call an all-in-one DXP, or you can go to the MarTech stack. And they've said, look, we have all these features. On the DXP side, we can give you all these things. And again, if we had time on stage, I could literally break down each one of these and explain to you, we can deliver those things, but we'll get there in a second. Meanwhile, the MarTech stack from 2011 to 2020 went from 150 SaaS platforms to over 10,000. It's amazing the things you can do out there with SaaS platforms today. But do you want to make choices like this for your marketing team? Each one of those tiny little dots is a company, is a platform, is an idea. And they're saying, we want to sell you our features, just like Alberto said. We want to sell you our features, not our use cases. So how are we going to sell against that, right? Well, let's talk about what's wrong with them. If anybody says, I can't do it with WordPress because I want to use one of these all-in-one systems or one of these closed-source systems or SaaS, here's a list of things that you can deal with. Here's the things that you can talk to your clients about and talk to people in the community about. Not only is there black box and software lockout, but when you talk about the SaaS lock-in with the data, which we're going to get to a little bit later, when you talk about the way things are disguised in the selling process, it's a completely different experience of using data than if you've ever used open source before. So what are the major points we use to be able to say, let's look at open source in the enterprise? We actually talk about the fact that there is no vendor lock-in. If you don't like the vendor you're using for open source, you can move from one to the next. We're always joking about it in the enterprise space. There's a few firms that sometimes we just keep rotating clients depending on who they bring on board or have leave. You can innovate faster. Why? Because we're using these open source libraries, because we can play with sandboxes. You can customize without these massive regression tests, because at the very beginning we're using these automated and human systems to make sure that things are going well. You have the massive install base. That's the second most important thing that we hear. We have this massive install base. So if you install Adobe Experience Manager in the enterprise, you have a few thousand developers out there who are really experienced in Adobe Experience Manager. How many tens of thousands of WordPress developers are in this community? It's amazing. And every day, all of you are getting to the next level of what you can do in the WordPress space. So, but what really ends up being the winner in the enterprise conversation is TCO, total cost of ownership. I can't tell you the amount of times we have been able to actually get into a bidding process that was only for closed source, because we said, not only are you going to save on licensing costs, but if done right, your running total cost of ownership will lower and lower and lower. There's a lot of case studies around what IBM did with Red Hat starting in the 90s that really proved that for the enterprise. And we're just using those same models today. This is not new business theory. So let's quickly discuss the technology range that's available in the perception. This is the way the IT department with the technology Marcom folks thinks of things. They think of things from all the way from let's do something completely bespoke, and I left it with open source PHP right now, to let's do a complete turnkey product. And you can see WordPress and Drupal, and now a little bit more advanced Acquia with some of the things they're doing in hosting that aren't part of the Drupal project, are being perceived as the next step. But there's this giant gap, the enterprise gap. What can we do to fill that? Well, we can use open source as a hub to not completely compete with the SaaS market, to not completely compete with the MarTech stack, but to actually use it as a hub to connect to the market, to the SaaS stack. If you think of WordPress and open source as an actual hub with the spokes coming out functionally, you start getting this idea that actually you don't have to write everything within your application, within WordPress. If you do it in a performant way, you can bring data back and forth. So looking back at these massive features that these DXP platforms say they have, right? They're saying, oh, well, we have all these things. If we break that down, what we end up with is three basic parts. We end up with trying to push content or manage a channel. We end up trying to do integrations, and we end up with a lot of legacy stuff that the enterprise still deals with. If you break it down into those three sections, let's talk about it from the WordPress way for a second. I'm going to switch streams and come back to the way we think about things here in this community, right? We think about things with a core, like WordPress, and then we put plugins around it, and then we put more extensive open source libraries around it if it's really complex. And then on top of that, we're starting to connect to things. Well, by doing that already today, we can start creating the same feature stack that they're selling within MarTech in closed source. We can actually do that. But instead of trying to really figure out how to sell against the feature set, we do need to keep in mind the story, the user story, the customer story. So let's take a look at it again back from the perspective of the client, because this is sort of the crux of this talk, and then we'll get to how it gets taken away. If you start from an open source core, right, it's important to have embedded around it the right platform. At CRUD Favorite, we call it sort of the platform as a service. This is going to be your managed hosting. This is going to be your extension into the physical world, serverless as it's coming up, all those wonderful things. Then around that, you have these core services that can be expressed as plugins. They can be expressed as different ways of getting the story accomplished for the enterprise. And then finally, you're actually looking at outside your main stack. How are you connecting to these things, right? So as we do that, I'll quickly, instead of giving you all theory, I'll give you some actual live examples on the internet today. And some of this is interesting if you've never seen it before. For the Walt Disney Company, in 2014, we started building a site that started getting away from the core concept of just the content, because they came to us and they said, we need to build a website that on day one is going to have 14 million assets. We're going to need a website that instead of going through the typical process of workflow that you do in WordPress, we're going to have to turn pages and posts into shows and episodes, and we're going to have to figure out how to completely change the workflow, because we have 8 people to manage 25,000 shows and over 250,000 episodes. 8 people. Oh, and by the way, this has to do it with sunset and sunrise of different content in different countries because of licensing rights. It was amazing. That system still live today. It's still being developed. They're having changes. In fact, they're now bringing Hulu and the Disney Plus into the system. Academic partnerships. Academic partnerships is a great example of how an agency and a managed hosting company like WP Engine were able to look at an RFP that went out for an enterprise client, and that RFP didn't say we're looking for a website. That RFP said we're looking for AEM, Adobe Experience Manager, or Sitecore, or a competitor. So it was written with questions as a product. We went to WP Engine, we said, we want to answer this as a product. We're not going to hide WordPress, we're not going to hide WP Engine, but we want to answer the questions without making the distinction. Not only did we win the project, but the real-life example saved them a ton of money, and it's now a case study that's winning over closed source into the open source space. The US Olympic and Paralympic Museum in Colorado Springs, Colorado, they came to us and said, we have an in real life museum that is digitally set up. You are walking through physical spaces, you are interacting with the space, and we need to have you have an interesting experience before, when you get your tickets and you're getting ready to come, in the museum, and then we want to keep that relationship going after you leave. The only way we could do that, because they looked at closed source systems, was by extending the APIs. And it turned out that a lot of the physical hardware in the museum, those vendors were using open source to run the hardware. So it was actually easier to hook up our APIs than it would have been if they had to use closed source systems. For Janus Henderson, I'll go quickly on this one. We were able to quite literally hook up big data into WordPress and also run everything through federal filters for investments, all sorts of legal fun stuff and compliance stuff, in a way that, again, only the closed source systems have been able to do now. For those of you who've never heard of LKQ Corporation, LKQ Corporation is a 95% monopoly on used car parts in the world, including here in Asia. They have hundreds of brands throughout the world that they need to manage, and they manage it all through WordPress, even though the sub-sites and sub-countries are every single other platform you can think of. Finally, before we get back to our story, Insperity, a large HR firm in the US, they were on Sitecore for years, and one of the major reasons they were on Sitecore is because they used a feature called progressive profiling, and it was a core of their sales team and a core of their business. Just to give you an example, they were able to save between 35 and 40% year over year for 4 years in a row by switching from Sitecore to open source. You can't do that. You can't see those savings if you're stuck on a roadmap of a closed source system. I'm going to mention Emmys real quick because it's an ongoing project that is based on WordPress, and it's starting to push the limits of what we can do in WordPress. It's starting to push the limits of really how do we extend the features without having to say, we're going to have to use WordPress only for a piece of it. There's a lot of the pieces here that technically, if somebody wants to talk about it later, that we have to do with Laravel and other ways. We're still keeping it open source, but we're trying to figure out how to do that. And what does that look like? That looks like this. As we've gotten to this point now of what we call these digital experience platforms, the level of effort is so high for the marketing teams that they're saying, we can't deal with one more interface. We can't deal with what we're going to do. So as we've started to say, how do we deal it? How do we deal with these things? What's come up is this. We think about things as, okay, we're just going to connect all these applications in. We're going to use smart data connectors, and it's just going to be easy. You're just going to throw it into a database. The reality is it starts looking like this. You start having these data lakes and data warehouses. Again, this is conceptual. All the engineers can come ask me about it later. And that allows us to start doing things like this, which is really exciting to the enterprise. Thies was on stage saying that when you're starting out, data isn't important. It's absolutely true. Run your business, get to that next stage. A lot of the enterprise clients, they make their decisions only based on the data they can do because they've reached sort of that spot in the experience. And being able to do that is absolutely incredible. So what ends up happening, though, is we get back to this. Instead of having just a few things to integrate, by the time you're done with a conversation, who wants to manage that? None of us do. It's up to us to convince the SaaS world that they have to be compatible with open source. That for them to expand to their market, this is important, for them to expand to their market, they have to come to us in the open source world because we will have the rest of the customer experience besides the very vertical slice that they have. So this is leading to a new opportunity. Some of the things that we're actively right now talking with our clients about is this, data lakes. How do you take, symbolized by the colors, separate SaaS sources, bring it into a data lake where you own all your data, all your information. You can imagine some of these clients who they are from my slides earlier, and then parse it back out for use outside of that system. They want to own their own data just like the consumer does. they have the luxury of being able to spend the money to start having these conversations, and it's amazing. So, back to this. We are looking at these moments and these times where we're saying, we've covered that middle area in the hub there. How do we make that intelligent data warehouse? How do we bring that there? And then past that, how do we start sharing that data within the enterprise? Open source can do that better than anything else. Again, done right, all sorts of caveats. We are the only community of technology that we can actually bring this stuff together. That will allow us to be sort of the center of the conversation when it comes to bringing these applications together if we do this right. But we have to band together as an open source community like we have in the past to say, we can be the future of technology in the enterprise. We can be the answer for big brands. Why? Because then we can truly create this omni-channel experience. We can truly manage the data for our clients. We can truly bring these things together. And what does that end up doing? Well, that brings us to the point where we're going to hit the other end of the bell curve. It's getting easier and easier as we unify these experiences, as we say we want APIs to other systems so that we can bring a unified workflow to the experience of the marketing team. It starts to go down. Today we are solidly right here in the digital experience platform, and we are solidly moving towards a fully modular DXP, the truly composable solution, because we are bringing down the level of difficulty for marketing teams to manage more. But to do that, as a community, we're going to have to work together to actually bring down the overhead of making unified workflows. Everybody here who is in design knows about atomic design in graphical design. We have to apply that to UI and UX at a technical level so that, imagine if we had a standard of a technical standard around atomic UX design so that we had a common set of, I'm going to use a word, hooks, filters, what have you, that did this. Well, that gets us solidly on the road of the possibilities of the future. Now, I grew up with the term brick and mortar. I'm just finding out the newest thing is phygital. I think it's awesome, but some people are laughing at me. I think it's funny as hell. So, where do we get to the future? How do we do this? The answer, my friends, is this community. The answer is pushing open source into the enterprise because it benefits everybody, including medium business, small business, and the individual contributors to the individual projects, even down to the blog level. So I hope this has been something of an eye-opener. I hope you've seen something new and interesting. Thank you so much for your time, and anything I can do to answer some questions.
Thank you. Please raise your hands. Everybody except Noel, please. Sorry. Yeah, give him. Yeah, thank you.
Hello. So this is Mizan. So it's really amazing. Thank you very much. So my question is, I mean, since you have been working with a different enterprise, and you have like AEM, Sitecore is like pretty strong over there. So is there any case where the client is already using kind of AEM there, and you could convert into WordPress? And if yes, what was the approach? I'm just curious to know, because enterprise has lots of budget and they are more into that kind of Adobe, or they're more comfortable, I would say. Mm-hmm. And they have lots of budget that need. Sometimes it feels like they need to spend that budget anyway. So I'm just curious to know that journey.
If I understood the question right,
yeah.
Are there enterprises using this currently, or are they moving?
No, I mean, for instance, they might be already using AEM.
Yes.
and you approached them and
Yes.
you converted them to WordPress, something like that.
Yes.
Is
So
there any case?
the example I used was the HR company Insperity. They
Okay.
were already on Sitecore. I have others that I can't talk about on stage, but there are a
Okay.
few large brands at both AEM, Sitecore, Liferay, Bloomreach.
Right.
They get to a point where the costs are so high, both of licensing, total cost of ownership, of trying to upgrade to their next level, that they come to us and they say, can you give us an idea, a thumbnail sketch of what the total cost of ownership would be of this feature set in open source?
Right.
That's been happening. The interesting thing that's happening now is enterprises are saying, wait, before I actually only get RFPs from closed source systems, let's also include some open source alternatives. The problem is that we are losing the battle of trying to show that WordPress is an alternative. People are flocking right now to Acquia as the open source alternative. We need to show our power because we are the larger community and we have more roadmap ahead of us.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. This actually marries perfectly my next question. So our agency works specifically with Drupal and with WordPress. And we see all the enterprise clients going directly with Drupal. Now, you mentioned just before, it's like, if we want WordPress to start lowering the curve, we need to work together as a community and to show the power of the community. What I find with the WordPress community, which, by the way, I love, so this is not a criticism, but it's just a difference from what I see between the Drupal community and the WordPress community, is that the Drupal community comes in together as open source and works on single projects together. You don't have a situation like in WordPress where you've got, let's say, 4 or 5, maybe 6 main form plugins. You only have web form where everybody contributes and it is mostly to do with, like it's not priced, it's not, there's no premium.
Right.
So I don't know, I feel that that is something that from a client perspective raises a lot of problem and question, at least with the conversation that I'm having with our clients.
Okay. So if I understand the question, we're talking about the differences in how the WordPress project sometimes approaches things as opposed to the Drupal project approaching things in a little bit more of an ERP or planned fashion. I completely understand. Now, I don't know if Josefa's in the room, but a lot of us are trying to apply pressure to innovate on how we approach things within the WordPress world. But at the same time, I'm going to take the other stance. And I'm also going to say, the more we move towards this model of talking about what we can do for the clients, the less they care what's going on inside the project and how. They only care of the results. I have 1 in 10 clients who do the research to find out what's going on literally on the feature track of WordPress when we're talking to them, even in the deep IT departments. They're much more interested in the possible roadmap that we could bring them or how we're going to compete with the incredible marketing that is going on with these closed stack systems in the DXP Forrester Gartner area.
Hi.
Okay.
I have a question here. Hi. So I just wanted to add to the previous person's previous question. Here, I am here. Okay.
Hi.
Yeah, hi. So can you tell me the 3 difficult questions an enterprise asks when you approach them for an open source project? When including open source solution like WordPress and other stuff. Can you describe those 3 difficult questions and can you tell me how you actually answer them in order to reduce the sales cycle? Because the questions and the things that they ask, right, and actually it involves a huge amount of processes that actually delays the entire sales cycle, and the majority of the people in the WordPress community are in the small and medium businesses, and it is very difficult for them to handle, such a large sales cycle.
Right. Oh, did that go off? Okay, good. So these are the most asked questions right here. But to get to what I think is the key to your answer is, in our small sliver of WordPress, where we deal with clients at our scale, they were asking years ago about security. They were asking years ago about the same questions that I got a few nights ago when I went to a local meetup about how are we going to compete against the basics of what medium-level closed source systems are giving us. And the answer really is with managed WordPress partners for hosting, with having DevOps people on your team or knowing a DevOps team. Really, these things get to be answered for them. I'm not sure if I understood the question past that level, but really these questions are the ones coming up once they're not looking at how do we push forward just a piece of content, but how do we have that two-way relationship with our customer? How do we take advantage of all the incredible innovations, right? We've been playing with OpenAI since the first instant they made it available out there, but it seems like yesterday or last month that all of a sudden it blew up, right? And now everybody wants to talk about it. Thank goodness we had the resources at Crowd Favorite to already have played with that so we could answer our clients' questions. But really, depending on the scale of the client you're working with, the answer is I would always try to move them to look past the technology. You should be their trusted partner in trying to work through that to what is their, as Alberto said, what is their user story? What is their goal? Not what is their feature set. I hope that helps.
Noel, please, I'm curious for your question.
Sounds good. Hey, Karim.
Hey.
Your friendly competition here. Thank you so much for the talk. I think it was very insightful, necessary, and timely. We absolutely need to be talking about all these things, and you actually ended up going a lot deeper than I assumed, which is great because we don't often go into such detail about the enterprise at these conferences. So I'd love to go back to this most asked question about pushing content to true omnichannel. And you spoke to the hub and spoke model in terms of, how do we do that for content? And I love that, we have precedence, and then to a large degree with CDPs and customer data platforms, because they've essentially gone through the whole roller coaster of adoption, disruption, and ultimately getting to a point where large enterprise now owns their customer data and their customer behavioral data. And they've moved away from the Twilio segments, and they've gone into Snowflake, and the data is there. And for me, there's only two big thematic pieces in these data lakes. It's customer data and there's content data. And the challenge I have with WordPress and what I'm trying to overcome, and these are conversations that you and I and Robert and everybody else has, is that how do we compete with the Adobes and the Sitecores around this content model, but then how do we also make it even more exciting? And you've used the word composable quite a lot around, so I think the word that I'm pursuing, obviously, or phrase is composable content platforms. I would love for WordPress to be able to attain a point where it does not have the perception of purely a web-centric content platform, but a really open source,
I'm with you.
solve the world,
I'm with you.
composable content. I know you are.
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we make it exciting? How does enterprise get to feel the WordPress love and be a part of that?
I'm glad you're sitting next to Alberto because literally his slides from yesterday, no, seriously, his slides from yesterday, that's exactly the point. I'm going to say something that might be controversial for the project, but this is conceptual. I'm not talking about any one line of code, so please don't, come and get mad at me. But we have to make everything more composable and modular. Okay? In 2014, we had to replace media content in WordPress with a digital asset management tool. We didn't have a choice. It's one of the most complex things that we did in that time because we had to make it seamless. That is becoming more of a standard in the enterprise. That's becoming more of a standard, not to pick on the media manager, but to look at everything else. The more we look at making WordPress performant yet a little bit more modular, the more we can say it really is a standard. Because if you do want to play with it at any level, from the democratization of publishing and somebody starting a blog all the way up to the Walt Disney Channel or anybody else using them, the Walt Disney Corporation or anybody else using them as a full solution across the enterprise, you really need to figure out how to deal with some of the issues that we're talking about, whether it's backwards compatibility, whether it's composable, being able to not add bloat to the project, being able to add it in a way that you can say, yes, we have these pieces. When we're in a consumer market, we have these other pieces in small business, medium business, and then the enterprise. This is possible. These are proven things that are already done in other technologies. We just need to apply them to the project. And frankly, we, not anybody, but we need to decide that it's a priority for the future of the project, for the sustainability of WordPress.
Next question. I'm Courtney Robertson from GoDaddy Pro, dev advocate there. And I am fascinated with the understanding of open source MarTech and how that would impact the enterprises that begin to embrace all open source MarTech. WordPress as its hub, but then all of those other data lakes and spokes that you spoke about, how the enterprises are going to address upgrading the open source. Is that going to come back to agencies that help get them set up? Is that going to create departments in the enterprise sector to maintain their own updates and be more aware, because they've relied upon these third-party systems, Salesforce, et cetera, because they handle their own software development. But as new development comes along, as we know with WordPress, new software, new functionality, how are enterprises addressing maintenance and upkeep of all of that?
Okay, complex question. I'm going to try to get to different aspects of it as quickly as I can. Robert's going to pull me off stage, I'm sure. But a couple of different aspects there. Aspect number one, a lot of us agencies write our contracts so that we're not doing work for hire, we're not assigning the rights, and the way we explain that to our clients is by saying, we are using what we've learned on the last project in open source to help you. We need to have the right to help the next person. And when we make those advances, there's literally plugins at this event, products and hosting companies that have received code from crowd favorite, human-made, and others to help, and that made its way back into core, made its way back into the process. That's one aspect. The other aspect, some of our larger clients are actually asking us to participate in giving some of the innovations we're doing back to the project. There's a lot of things going on in the project, as we heard earlier. It's about priorities for the project, and unfortunately, I don't have a say in that. But most importantly, it's about trying to explain that the true lowering of the total cost of ownership for the enterprise, at least, is looking at a model that was developed quite literally 24 years ago by IBM and Red Hat, where they said, Red Hat is going to be its own flavor. If you don't want support, go ahead and download Fedora. You can play with it all your own. In the meantime, you can go to IBM for a support contract, and they will be what we call in the enterprise your one throat to choke. So we provide that service for our clients. Like, you don't have to go to the WordPress community. You don't have to go and find out from Gravity Forms or from Yoast what their roadmap is. We will be your trusted partner. We will maintain that relationship. And certain products, like the ones I just mentioned, are really good partners for the enterprise. They're like, yes, this is what we're doing. Yes, we understand you're having this particular problem in the enterprise. And they've made adjustments, and they've kept the enterprise so that they're more interested in open source. So it's important to literally have a community aspect, even a community of companies, not just a community of individuals. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Anyone else a question? Anyone else? Okay, Karim, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
So the other competitors of us, they are having the cuffs off. They're simply attacking us. They're simply attacking WordPress, going like, as you showed, this is not working. What could we do as WordPress? What could we do as open source systems to like work on that in a short manner?
Sorry. What
can we do? What can we do as open source systems to like work on that and be more a competitor to them?
It doesn't have to be one community. For us to be able to solve some of the problems that I showed here today, it doesn't have to be one giant community all trying to solve all the problems at once. We can create focus areas of the community, like we did with the Gutenberg project. We can create ways to focus on markets like that. We can still maintain backwards compatibility and be accepting and inviting and inclusive of young 18-year-olds who want to just learn their first line of code and write their first plugin. And at the same time, we can come all the way over to the enterprise and look at how to create a modular way to create a unified way of UX, a unified workflow for the enterprise clients. It can be done, but we have to, as a community, decide that we don't have to only laser focus in one direction. And I think that's coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you for telling us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody.